The silver watch glinted in the afternoon sun as Violet Preston held it up to the light, her heart hammering with a mixture of confusion and dread because the inscription inside read, "Property of First National Bank of Santa Fe, stolen 1878." And today was April 14th, 1879. She sat in the dusty parlor of her small rented room in Hachita, New Mexico, surrounded by packing crates and wedding dress fabrics, her hands trembling as she turned the watch over and over. Her fiancé, Marcus Whitley, had given it to her just yesterday, claiming it was a family heirloom passed down from his grandfather. But this inscription told a different story entirely. Violet's breath caught in her throat as she remembered all the other gifts Marcus had bestowed upon her during their 6-month courtship. The expensive silk gloves, the pearl hairpins, the promises of a grand estate waiting for her in Denver once they were married next month. She had believed every word because she wanted to believe. After losing her parents to fever 2 years ago and working herself ragged as a seamstress to make ends meet, Marcus had seemed like an answer to prayers she had barely dared to whisper. He was handsome, charming, well-dressed, and spoke of business ventures and inherited wealth with such confidence that she never thought to question him. The watch slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the wooden floor. Violet buried her face in her hands, fighting back tears. She was 22 years old and had thought herself a sensible woman, not the type to be taken in by a silver tongue and empty promises. But here she was, engaged to a man who might very well be a thief, or, worse, a con artist who had been courting her for reasons she was only beginning to understand. A knock at her door made her jump. She quickly retrieved the watch and shoved it into her pocket, wiping her eyes before opening the door a crack. Her landlady, Mrs. Chen, stood in the hallway with her usual stern expression. "Miss Preston, there is a gentleman downstairs asking for you. Says his name is Xavier Lawson and that it is urgent business regarding Marcus Whitley." Violet's stomach dropped. "I do not know anyone by that name. He seems quite insistent, says he is a ranch hand from the Triple Bar spread outside town. I told him you were a respectable young woman, but he says it concerns your safety." Mrs. Chen's weathered face softened slightly. "I would not normally allow such meetings, but something in his manner convinced me this was important." Violet nodded slowly, her mind racing. "I will be down in a moment." She checked her appearance in the small mirror, tucking a loose strand of dark hair back into place and smoothing her simple blue cotton dress. Whatever this Xavier Lawson wanted, she would face it with her chin up and her wits about her. The man waiting in the boarding house's small receiving room was tall and lean, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that needed a trim. He stood when she entered, removing his battered hat, to reveal hazel eyes that regarded her with an intensity that made her pause in the doorway. He wore working clothes, dusty chaps over worn denim, a faded shirt, and a bandana tied loosely around his neck. Everything about him spoke of honest labor under the harsh New Mexico sun. "Miss Preston?" His voice was low and rough, like gravel tumbling in a creek bed. "I am she. Mrs. Chen said you had urgent business regarding my fiancé." She kept her voice steady despite the anxiety churning in her stomach. Xavier Lawson's jaw tightened. "May we speak privately? What I have to say is not for general ears." Violet glanced at Mrs. Chen, who had stationed herself in the corner with her knitting, clearly not planning to leave them entirely alone. "This is as private as propriety allows, Mr. Lawson. Please say what you came to say." He shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable, then seemed to make a decision. "I will speak plain, Miss Preston. The man you know as Marcus Whitley is not who he claims to be. His real name is Marcus Webb, and he is a confidence man who has worked this territory for the past 3 years, courting women of modest means and convincing them to sign over property, savings, or access to family inheritances before disappearing." The words hit her like a physical blow, even though part of her had been preparing for something like this since finding the watch. "That is quite an accusation, Mr. Lawson. What proof do you have?" "My sister Ruth." His voice dropped, and pain flickered across his weathered face. "She met him in Silver City 2 years ago. He called himself Marcus Wendell then. Courted her for 4 months, won her trust, convinced her to sell our family's small farm so they could invest in a fictitious mining operation in Colorado. She signed over every cent we had. The day after the sale went through, he vanished, Ruth was so devastated she could barely function for months. We lost everything. Violet's legs felt weak, and she sank into the nearest chair. Mrs. Chen had stopped knitting, her needles frozen in mid-stitch. Xavier continued, his words coming faster now. I have been tracking him since then, working ranches across the territory and keeping my ears open. When I heard a man matching his description was courting a seamstress in Hachita, I rode straight here. It took me 3 days to confirm it was him. Different name, same face, same methods. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket and handed it to her. This is my sister's statement, signed and witnessed, and I have spoken to 2 other women in Las Cruces and Socorro with similar stories. Violet unfolded the paper with shaking hands. The handwriting was feminine and neat, but the pain in the words was unmistakable. Ruth Lawson described meeting Marcus, his promises, his charm, and the devastating betrayal that followed. At the bottom was her signature and those of 2 witnesses. Miss Preston, Xavier said quietly, stepping closer but maintaining a respectful distance. Has he asked you to sign anything? Has he shown interest in any property or money you might have? She thought about it, her mind spinning. I inherited a small piece of land from my parents, just 5 acres on the outskirts of town with a cottage. It is not much, but Marcus mentioned several times that we should sell it before the wedding to fund our move to Denver. Her voice cracked. He said he had a grand house waiting for us there, and that my little property would fetch enough to cover traveling expenses and new furnishings. Xavier's expression darkened. There is no house in Denver. Once you sign over that property, he will disappear with the deed or the money from its sale, and you will never see him again. How do I know you are telling the truth? Violet asked, but even as she spoke, she was pulling the watch from her pocket. How do I know you are not the con artist, trying to turn me against an innocent man? She held up the watch, and Xavier's eyes widened in recognition. Where did you get that? Marcus gave it to me yesterday. Said it was a family heirloom. She showed him the inscription. But it appears to have been stolen from a bank in Santa Fe. Xavier let out a low whistle. That was part of a payroll robbery last year. 3 men made off with cash and several valuable items from deposit boxes. One of the robbers matched Marcus's description, but they never caught him. He looked at her with something like respect in his eyes. You found this on your own? Only just before you arrived. I was trying to make sense of it when Mrs. Chen announced you. Violet stood, her initial shock giving way to cold anger. So, my fiancé is not only a con artist, but also a thief, possibly worse. Miss Preston, I cannot prove he was involved in that robbery without more evidence, but I can prove he has defrauded at least 3 women that I know of, and I suspect there are more. Xavier's voice was urgent now. Has he convinced you to sign anything yet? Do you have any legal documents prepared? We were supposed to meet with a land agent tomorrow to discuss the sale of my property, Violet said, her mind racing through every conversation, every promise Marcus had made. He has been pressing me to finalize it quickly, saying the buyer is eager and the price is generous. It is a trap, Xavier said flatly. The land agent is probably working with him, or the documents are forgeries. Either way, once you sign, your property will be gone, and so will Marcus. Violet pressed her hands to her temples, trying to think clearly through the shock and anger. What do I do? Confront him? Go to the sheriff? The sheriff in Hachita is useless, bought and paid for by the saloon owner, Mrs. Chen interjected, speaking for the first time. She had been listening to everything with sharp attention. And the territorial marshal is 3 days' ride away in Las Cruces. Xavier nodded. Moreover, Marcus will have legal documents that appear legitimate on their surface. These men are professionals. They know how to stay just on the edge of the law, making it difficult to prosecute them even when you know what they are doing. So I am just supposed to let him get away with it? Violet's voice rose with frustration and fear. Let him move on to his next victim? No, Xavier said, his hazel eyes meeting hers with determination. We catch him in the act. We gather evidence that cannot be disputed, and we expose him in a way that ruins his operation here. But Miss Preston, I need your help to do it, and I need you to trust me. Violet studied the cowboy standing before her. Everything about Xavier Lawson spoke of hard work and harder living. His hands were calloused, his face lined from sun and wind, and there was a weariness in his eyes that came from disappointment and loss. But there was also something solid about him, something that felt trustworthy in a way Marcus never had. even when she was convinced of his devotion. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. Over the next 2 hours, sitting in that small receiving room with Mrs. Chen as their occasionally interjecting chaperone, they formed a plan. Violet would keep her appointment with Marcus and the land agent the next day, but she would bring Xavier along as her brother, just arrived from Texas. Xavier would pose as someone protective of family interests, who wanted to review all documents before his sister signed anything. The hope was that Marcus would slip up under questioning, or that Xavier would be able to identify the land agent as a fellow swindler. "He might bolt if he thinks you are suspicious," Xavier warned. "These men have good instincts for danger." "Then I will have to be convincing," Violet said, surprised by the steel she heard in her own voice. "Marcus has been playing a role for months. I can manage one evening and one meeting." As the sun began to set and Xavier prepared to leave, promising to return the next morning before the scheduled appointment, he paused at the door. "Miss Preston, I want you to know that I am not doing this for revenge, though I will not deny I want to see Marcus answer for what he did to Ruth. But mostly I am doing this because no one should have to go through what my sister went through. The shame, the loss, the way it broke something in her." His voice roughened. "She still has not fully recovered, even 2 years later. If I can prevent that from happening to you, then maybe some good can come from all this." "Thank you," Violet said quietly, "for caring about a stranger." "You are not a stranger," Xavier said, and there was something in his tone that made her heart skip oddly. "You are someone who deserves better than what Marcus Whitley was planning for you." After he left, Violet sat in her room as darkness fell over Hachita, listening to the distant sounds of the saloons and gambling halls coming to life. She should have been devastated, she thought. She should have been crying over her broken engagement and shattered dreams. But instead, she felt a strange sense of relief mixed with her anger. Some part of her had known, she realized. Some instinct had been whispering warnings that she had ignored because she so desperately wanted security and companionship. Well, she would not ignore her instincts anymore. That evening, Marcus arrived for dinner as planned, bringing flowers and smiles. Violet accepted both, playing her part, laughing at his jokes and pretending to be excited about their upcoming meeting with the land agent. It was harder than she expected, knowing what she now knew, seeing the calculation behind his charming eyes. But she managed, and when he kissed her hand at the door and promised her that their future together would be grander than her wildest dreams, she smiled and said she believed him. The moment the door closed behind him, she locked it and leaned against the wood, her heart pounding. She had done it. She had fooled the con man, at least for now. The next morning dawned clear and hot, as April days in southern New Mexico often did. Violet dressed carefully in her best dress, a modest green cotton with lace at the collar that she had made herself. She wanted to look like a woman excited about her future, not one who had uncovered a devastating truth. Xavier arrived at 9 o'clock sharp, cleaned up from the previous day but still clearly a working man. He had shaved and wore a slightly better shirt, but his hands and demeanor still spoke of ranches and cattle, not city life and business dealings. "You remember the story?" Violet asked quietly as they waited in the boarding house parlor for Marcus to arrive. "You wrote to me in Texas telling me about your engagement and upcoming property sale," Xavier recited. "I rode here to meet my future brother-in-law and make sure my little sister's interests were protected. Since our parents are gone, and I am the head of the family, I am suspicious by nature and want to review everything before you sign." "And your name?" "Xavier Preston, just arrived from El Paso." He gave her a slight smile. "Do not worry, Miss Preston. I have been planning this conversation for 2 years. I know every question to ask and every lie to watch for." Marcus arrived 15 minutes later, his expression shifting from surprised to calculating to warmly welcoming in the space of seconds when Violet introduced Xavier as her brother. "My goodness, Violet, you did not mention your brother was coming to visit. What a wonderful surprise." "I wanted it to be a surprise," Violet said, threading her arm through Xavier's in what she hoped looked like sisterly affection. "Xavier has been working a ranch in Texas, but when I wrote to him about our engagement and the property sale, he insisted on coming to meet you and to help me navigate the legal aspects. You know how protective brothers can be." She felt Xavier's arm tense slightly under her hand and realized this was the first time they had touched. Even through the fabric of his shirt, she could feel the lean strength in his arm, the coiled readiness of a man used to physical labor and potential danger. Marcus's smile never wavered. Of course, of course. Any brother worth his salt would want to ensure his sister's welfare. I am delighted to meet you, Xavier. Violet speaks of you often. That was a lie. Violet had mentioned a fictional brother perhaps once in passing months ago, testing whether Marcus would remember details about her family. He had not remembered until now, which told her he had not been paying attention to anything that did not relate to his scheme. They walked together to the land agent's office on the main street of Hachita, making small talk about the weather and the growth of the town. Marcus kept up a steady stream of charming conversation, but Violet noticed he was watching Xavier with sharp attention, trying to assess whether this unexpected development posed a threat to his plans. The land agent's office was a small adobe building with a faded sign reading, Harvey Simmons, Land and Property. Inside, a thin man with slicked back hair and a nervous manner stood up from behind a cluttered desk. Ah, Mr. Whitley, Miss Preston, right on time. I have all the documents prepared for signature. Excellent, Marcus said smoothly. Though we have an addition to our party. This is Violet's brother, Xavier, just arrived from Texas. He will be reviewing the documents before Violet signs, as is proper. Harvey Simmons' expression flickered with something that might have been alarm, but he recovered quickly. Of course, of course. Family should always be involved in important decisions. Xavier stepped forward, his entire demeanor changing. Gone was the quiet, respectful cowboy. In his place was someone harder, sharper, with eyes that missed nothing. I will need to see the deed to the property, the purchase agreement, proof of the buyer's funds, and any commission agreements between you and Mr. Whitley. Simmons blinked. I assure you, sir, everything is in order. Then you will not mind showing me the documents, Xavier said flatly. All of them. For the next 30 minutes, Xavier systematically dismantled the land sale. He pointed out that the purchase price was nearly 30% below market value. He noted that the buyer's information was suspiciously vague, with no local address or verifiable business references. He discovered that Simmons' commission was unusually high, and that there was a clause in the purchase agreement that would have transferred the deed to a holding company rather than an individual buyer. This holding company, Xavier said, his voice cold. What is its name and where is it registered? The, Western Property Development Company, Simmons stammered, registered in Colorado. Interesting. And who are the principals of this company? Simmons shuffled papers nervously. That information is not typically disclosed in sales of this nature. It is if the buyer expects a seller to sign over property, Xavier countered. He turned to Marcus, who had been growing increasingly tense as the questioning progressed. You have been very quiet, Mr. Whitley. You brought my sister to this office to sign over her inheritance, but you do not seem concerned about these irregularities. Marcus's charming mask slipped slightly. I am sure there are reasonable explanations. Mr. Simmons comes highly recommended. Recommended by whom? Xavier pressed. By business associates in Denver. The same business associates who are supposedly holding your grand house for you and Violet? Marcus's eyes narrowed. You seem remarkably suspicious for someone who just arrived in town, Xavier. One might think you did not want your sister to be happy. One might think you did not want me asking questions, Xavier shot back. He pulled the stolen watch from his pocket and set it on Simmons' desk with a heavy click. Explain this. Marcus's face went pale. Where did you get that? You gave it to my sister as a gift, Xavier said. Told her it was a family heirloom, but it was actually stolen from First National Bank in Santa Fe during a robbery last year. You want to explain how your family heirloom ended up in a bank vault before being stolen? The room went silent. Violet watched Marcus's expression shift rapidly through shock, calculation, and finally anger. She could see him weighing his options, trying to decide whether to bluff his way through or cut his losses and run. He chose to run. Marcus suddenly lunged for the door, but Xavier was faster. He caught Marcus by the arm and slammed him against the wall with surprising force for someone who had been playing the role of concerned brother just moments before. Don not let that man near your money, Xavier said, looking at Violet over his shoulder, his voice urgent and fierce. Don not let him near your property, your savings, or anything else. He is a liar and a thief, and he was planning to leave you with nothing. Marcus struggled in Xavier's grip. You have no proof. The watch could have been stolen by anyone. You are just a jealous brother who does not want to see your sister happy. I have statements from 3 other women you have swindled, Xavier said, his voice deadly calm. I have your photograph from Silver City where you called yourself Marcus Wendell. And now I have a watch stolen in a bank robbery. That is enough for the territorial marshal to take a very close look at your operations, Mr. Webb. At the use of his real name, Marcus stopped struggling. His shoulders sagged, and something calculating entered his eyes. All right, you caught me. But think about this practically. I will leave town today. I will leave Violet her property and disappear. You will never see me again. No need to involve the law, no need for scandal. Violet keeps her reputation intact, and everyone goes their separate ways. No, Violet said, surprising herself with the vehemence in her voice. Both men turned to look at her. No, you do not get to just walk away. What about the other women you have hurt? What about Xavier's sister, who lost everything because of you? You need to face consequences. Marcus's expression hardened. You stupid girl. You should have just signed the papers and been grateful for the attention. Women like you, with your plain dresses and your sewing needles, you are lucky when men like me even look at you. The cruelty in his voice stung, but it also crystallized something for Violet. This was who Marcus really was underneath the charm. This was what he thought of her and every other woman he had targeted. Mr. Simmons, Xavier said, still holding Marcus against the wall. You have a choice. You can help us bring this man to justice, or you can go down with him as an accomplice to fraud and theft. What is it going to be? The land agent looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. I just process paperwork. I do not ask questions. Marcus approached me a month ago, said he had a business opportunity. So you are just incompetent, not criminal, Xavier said dryly. Fine. You are going to write out a statement of everything Marcus told you about this deal, and you are going to sign it. Then you are going to close your office and seriously reconsider your career choices. Over the next few hours, the situation unfolded rapidly. Xavier dragged Marcus to the sheriff's office, despite the lawman's legendary uselessness, because having an official complaint on record was important. Simmons wrote out his statement, his hand shaking the entire time. Violet added her own statement about the courtship and the watch. Xavier contributed his sister's statement and the information about the other victims. The sheriff, a heavy-set man named Daniels, who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else, took their statements with obvious reluctance. This is complicated business. Fraud cases are hard to prove. Man might just claim it was a misunderstanding. There is also the stolen watch, Xavier pointed out. That is straightforward theft of property from a bank robbery. You got proof he stole it, or just that he had it? Daniels asked. Could have bought it from the real thief. So investigate, Xavier said, his frustration evident. Send a telegram to Santa Fe, get a description of the robbery suspects, bring in the territorial marshal. Do your job. Daniels scowled but agreed to at least hold Marcus overnight while inquiries were made. It was not much, but it was something. As they left the sheriff's office, the afternoon sun beating down on the dusty street, Violet felt exhausted and wrung out. Everything that had seemed certain in her life just yesterday was gone. Her engagement, her plans for the future, her naive belief that someone could love her for who she was rather than what she owned. Are you all right? Xavier asked quietly as they walked back toward the boarding house. I do not know, Violet admitted. I feel foolish. I should have seen through him. These men are professionals, Xavier said. They are skilled at finding vulnerabilities and exploiting them. It is not your fault. Your sister, Violet said. What happened to her after Marcus stole from her? Xavier's expression darkened. She lives with me now on the Triple Bar Ranch where I work. She helps the owner's wife with household matters and earns a small wage. It is not the life she hoped for, but she is safe. And slowly, she is learning to trust again, though it has been hard. He paused. That is why I have been tracking Marcus. Not just for revenge, though I want that too, but to stop him from breaking anyone else the way he broke Ruth. They had reached the boarding house. Violet turned to face Xavier, really looking at him for the first time since this ordeal began. He was perhaps 26 or 27, she guessed, with a face that was more interesting than handsome, all strong bones and weathered skin. But his eyes were kind despite the hardness life had put in them, and he had crossed half the territory to protect a stranger from the man who had hurt his sister. Thank you, she said. For everything, for believing it was worth the effort to warn me." "Of course it was worth it," Xavier said, and there was an intensity in his voice that made her breath catch. "You deserve better than Marcus Whitley and his lies. You deserve someone who sees your worth and does not need to pretend to be something he is not." Something passed between them in that moment, something that felt significant despite the strange circumstances of their meeting. Then Xavier stepped back, breaking the spell. "I should get back to the ranch. I have been gone 3 days and my boss is understanding but not infinitely patient. But I will come back tomorrow to check on the situation with the sheriff and see if the territorial marshal responds." "Will I see you again?" Violet asked, and only realized after the words were out how much she hoped the answer was yes. Xavier smiled, a real smile that transformed his face. "Count on it, Miss Preston. This is not over yet, not by a long shot. And I am not leaving until I know you are safe." He tipped his hat to her and walked away, leading his horse toward the edge of town, where the Triple Bar Ranch lay several miles to the west. Violet watched him go, her emotions a confused tangle of fear, relief, gratitude, and something else she was not quite ready to name. The next several days were chaotic. The territorial marshal did respond, sending a deputy to investigate Marcus's background and the stolen watch. It turned out there were warrants for Marcus under 3 different names in Colorado and Arizona, and the watch was indeed confirmed as stolen property from the Santa Fe robbery. The case against him strengthened with each new piece of information. Xavier came to town every day, checking on the investigation's progress and on Violet herself. They fell into an easy routine of walking together in the early evening when the worst heat of the day had passed, talking about everything and nothing. She learned about his childhood on a small farm in Kansas, his parents' deaths from cholera, his determination to build a better life for himself and Ruth in the territories. He learned about her work as a seamstress, her parents' illness, her loneliness in the 2 years since their deaths. "I was so desperate for companionship," Violet confessed one evening, as they walked along the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open desert. "I think that is why I ignored all the warning signs with Marcus. He made me feel less alone. You should not have to compromise your safety and your future just to feel less alone," Xavier said firmly. "There is someone out there who will value you for exactly who you are, no pretense needed." "Is there?" Violet asked softly. "Sometimes I wonder. Hachita is a small town. There are not many prospects, and I am not getting any younger." Xavier stopped walking and turned to face her. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple behind him. "You are 22 years old. You have your whole life ahead of you. And for what it is worth, I think any man would be lucky to earn your trust and affection, especially after what Marcus put you through." "Xavier," Violet said, and found she was suddenly nervous. "Why have you been coming to town every day? The investigation is being handled by the deputy marshal now. You could return to your regular work at the ranch." He was quiet for a long moment, and in the fading light she could see him struggling with something. Finally he said, "Because I want to. Because I wake up every morning thinking about seeing you, and I go to sleep every night remembering your smile. Because in the middle of trying to save you from one man's lies, I seem to have fallen for you myself, and I do not know what to do about it." Violet's heart thundered in her chest. "You have feelings for me? Is that so surprising?" Xavier asked with a rueful smile. "You are intelligent, kind, resilient, and you did not fall apart when your world got turned upside down. You stood up for yourself and for the other women Marcus hurt. How could I not admire that? How could I not want to know you better?" "I have feelings for you too," Violet admitted, the words tumbling out. "I have been telling myself it is just gratitude, that I am confusing appreciation with attraction. But it is more than that. I feel safe with you in a way I never felt with Marcus, even before I knew the truth, and I find myself thinking about you constantly." Xavier took a step closer, his expression intense. "Violet, I am just a ranch hand. I do not have much to offer. No grand house in Denver, no impressive business ventures, just hard work and an honest life. But I swear to you, I would never lie to you, never try to take what is yours, never be anything other than exactly who I am." "That is all I want," Violet said, her eyes stinging with tears. "Honesty, respect, someone who sees me as a partner, not a target." "Then, may I court you properly?" Xavier asked. "Once this business with Marcus is settled and you have had time to recover from it, I want to do this right, Violet. I want you to be sure. I am sure, Violet said. I know it is fast, but I am sure. Xavier reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. His palm was rough with calluses, his grip warm and strong. I am sure too, and I promise you, I will spend however long it takes proving that I am worthy of that certainty. They stood there as the sun finished setting, hands linked, and Violet felt something settle in her chest. This was what the beginning of real love felt like, she realized. Not the dizzying whirlwind Marcus had created, but something steadier and deeper. Something built on truth instead of lies. The case against Marcus was solid enough that he was transported to Santa Fe to face charges related to the bank robbery, with additional charges pending in Colorado and Arizona for his confident schemes. The deputy marshal told Violet it was likely Marcus would spend significant time in prison and that she might be called to testify at his trial. "Will you be all right with that?" Xavier asked when she told him the news. They were sitting on the porch of her boarding house, carefully maintaining a proper distance while Mrs. Chen watched from the window. "Yes," Violet said. "I want to see this through, not just for me, but for Ruth and the others. Someone needs to hold him accountable." "Ruth would like you," Xavier said thoughtfully. "She would appreciate your strength." "Will you tell me more about her?" Violet asked. She had been curious about Xavier's sister, the woman whose tragedy had set all these events in motion. Xavier settled back in his chair, his eyes distant. "Ruth is 2 years younger than me. When we were growing up, she was the one who kept our spirits up when times were hard. Always laughing, always finding the bright side of things. After our parents died, she helped me save enough money to leave Kansas and come west. We were going to build something together, a new life where we could both thrive." His voice roughened. When Marcus took everything from her, it was not just the money and the property. It was her hope. She stopped laughing, stopped seeing the bright side. "It has been 2 years, and I still see the shadow of it in her eyes." "I would like to meet her," Violet said. "If she would be willing. Maybe it would help her to know that we stopped him, that he is finally facing consequences." "I think she would like that," Xavier said. "Though I warn you, she might be protective of me. She will want to make sure you are nothing like Marcus." Violet laughed. "I think I can handle sisterly scrutiny. After all, I have been through worse lately." As spring turned to early summer, their courtship deepened. Xavier continued working at the Triple Bar Ranch, but arranged his schedule so he could spend time in Hachita several times a week. They took walks, shared meals under Mrs. Chen's watchful eye, and talked for hours about their hopes and dreams for the future. Violet learned that Xavier was saving money to buy his own small ranch someday, that he loved horses more than cattle, and that he read poetry when he thought no one was watching. Xavier learned that Violet dreamed of opening her own dress shop, that she could identify any wildflower in the territory, and that she had a wicked sense of humor hidden beneath her proper demeanor. "You surprise me," Xavier said one afternoon, as they sat in the shade of a scraggly cottonwood tree on the outskirts of town. "Every time I think I know you, you reveal something new." "Is that good or bad?" Violet asked, smiling. "It is wonderful," Xavier said. "I want to spend years discovering all your layers." "Years?" Violet's heart skipped. "If you will have me," Xavier said seriously. "I know we have not been courting long, and I know you have reason to be cautious after Marcus. But Violet, I am in love with you, completely, irrevocably in love with you. And if you need time, I will wait. But I want you to know where my heart stands." Violet felt tears prick her eyes. "I love you too, Xavier. I did not think I could feel this way so soon after everything with Marcus. But this is completely different. What I feel for you is real in a way that nothing with him ever was." Xavier cupped her face gently in his hands. "May I kiss you?" "Yes," Violet breathed, and then his lips were on hers, warm and sure and absolutely right. The kiss was tender and searching, full of promise and possibility. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard and smiling. "I want to marry you," Xavier said. "Not today, not tomorrow, but soon, when you are ready, when the trial is behind us and you have had time to heal from what Marcus did. But I want you to know my intentions are completely honorable and completely serious." "I want that too," Violet said. "I want a life with you, Xavier Lawson, a real life built on honesty and partnership. They decided to wait until after Marcus's trial to make any formal announcements, wanting to close that chapter completely before starting their new one. In the meantime, Xavier introduced Violet to Ruth. The meeting took place at the Triple Bar Ranch on a warm Saturday in late June. Violet rode out with Xavier in a borrowed wagon, nervous about meeting the woman whose pain had inadvertently saved her from the same fate. Ruth Lawson was petite and dark-haired like her brother, with the same hazel eyes but a more delicate build. She was 24 years old and carried herself with a careful reserve that spoke of hard-won caution. When Xavier introduced them, Ruth studied Violet with an intensity that was almost uncomfortable. "So, you are the woman my brother has been sneaking off to see every few days," Ruth said. Her voice was pleasant but guarded. "I am," Violet said simply. "And you are the woman whose bravery in speaking out about Marcus helped save me from a terrible fate. Thank you for being willing to share your story." Something shifted in Ruth's expression, a slight softening. "Xavier told you what happened?" "He did. I am so sorry for what you went through. It was not your fault, and you did not deserve it." Ruth's eyes glistened. "People do not usually say that. They usually ask what I did wrong, how I could have been so foolish." "Then those people do not understand how skilled Marcus was at manipulation," Violet said firmly. "He fooled me too, and I would like to think I am reasonably intelligent. These con artists are professionals. They know exactly how to exploit our desire for connection and security." Ruth was quiet for a moment, then said, "Xavier says he loves you." "I love him too," Violet said. "Very much." "Do not hurt him," Ruth said, and there was steel beneath the softness. "He has spent 2 years trying to make things right for me, working himself to exhaustion and tracking down the man who destroyed our lives. He deserves someone who will appreciate that dedication." "I do appreciate it," Violet said, "and I promise you I have no intention of hurting your brother. He saved me in more ways than one, and I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure he knows how much that meant." Ruth studied her for another long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right. I will trust Xavier's judgment. He is usually a good judge of character, except for his unfortunate blindness where I am concerned. He still thinks I am fragile." "Are you?" Violet asked gently. "I was," Ruth admitted, "but I am getting stronger. Knowing that Marcus is finally facing justice helps, and seeing Xavier happy for the first time in years helps even more." The two women spent the afternoon together, while Xavier worked with the ranch owner on repairing some fencing. Ruth showed Violet around the ranch, and they discovered a shared interest in gardening and preserving wildflowers. By the time Xavier returned, dusty and tired, they were laughing together over Ruth's attempts to grow roses in the harsh New Mexico climate. "I see you two are getting along," Xavier said, relief evident in his voice. "Your sister is delightful," Violet said, "and she has promised to teach me how to ride properly since apparently my current skills are embarrassing." "They are pretty terrible," Xavier agreed with a grin. "You sit a horse like a sack of grain." "I am a seamstress from town, not a cowgirl," Violet protested, but she was laughing. As summer deepened, the trial date approached. Marcus was being tried in Santa Fe on the robbery charges first, with the fraud charges to follow. Xavier and Violet made the journey together, along with Ruth, who had been subpoenaed to testify about the fraud she had experienced. The trial was difficult, but ultimately successful. The evidence against Marcus was overwhelming, and his attempts to charm the jury fell flat. He was convicted of theft and fraud and sentenced to 10 years in the territorial prison. As the sentence was read, Violet felt a weight lift from her shoulders. It was over. Marcus could not hurt anyone else now. Outside the courthouse, Ruth broke down in tears, and Violet held her while she cried. "It is over," Ruth whispered. "It is finally over." "You are free now," Violet said. "We both are. We can move forward." Xavier watched them with an expression of such tenderness that Violet's heart ached. This man, she thought, was worth 10,000 Marcus Whitleys. This man was real and solid and true. That evening, in the hotel where they were staying before the journey back to Hachita, Xavier knocked on Violet's door. Mrs. Chen had come along as chaperone and was in the adjoining room, but she discreetly gave them privacy in the sitting area. "I have something for you," Xavier said. He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple gold ring with a small turquoise stone. "It was my mother's. It is not fancy, but it is real, and it has been in my family for 2 generations. Violet Preston, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me, honest and true, for as long as we both shall live?" Violet's vision blurred with tears. "Yes. Yes, Xavier, I will marry you. I will build a life with you, and I will love you every day." He slipped the ring on her finger, and it fit perfectly. Then he kissed her, deep and passionate and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling through tears. "When?" Xavier asked. "When can we get married?" "Soon," Violet said. "As soon as we get back to Hachita. I do not want to wait anymore. I have already wasted too much time on lies. I want to start our truth as soon as possible." They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Hachita. Ruth stood up for them, along with Mrs. Chen, who had become a dear friend to Violet. The ranch owner from the Triple Bar attended with his wife, and a handful of townspeople who had heard the story and wanted to show their support. Violet wore a dress she had made herself, simple ivory cotton with lace at the throat and wrists. Xavier wore his best clothes, clean and pressed, with a new shirt Ruth had insisted on buying him. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier kissed her like she was the most precious thing in the world, and Violet knew she had finally found her home. They spent their wedding night in Violet's little cottage on the 5 acres she still owned, the property Marcus had tried to steal from her. Xavier had spent the previous week fixing it up, repairing the roof and replacing broken windows. It was not much, but it was theirs. "I am going to build us a real house here," Xavier promised as they lay in bed that night, wrapped in each other's arms. "Something solid and lasting, big enough for a family." "A family?" Violet said softly, hope blooming in her chest. "If you want that," Xavier said. "I know we have not talked about it much, but I hope you want children someday. I think you would be an amazing mother." "I do want that," Violet said. "I want to build a life with you, Xavier, a real life with children and a home and years of happiness ahead of us." "Then, that is exactly what we will do," Xavier said, kissing her forehead, "starting right now." Their early marriage was not without challenges. Xavier continued working at the Triple Bar while slowly building their house on Violet's property. Violet continued her seamstress work, taking commissions from women throughout Hachita and the surrounding area. Money was tight, and there were times when they had to make difficult choices about where to spend their limited resources. But they faced every challenge together, making decisions as partners and supporting each other through difficulties. When Violet's sewing machine broke and they could not afford to fix it immediately, Xavier learned how to repair it himself, staying up late studying the mechanism until he figured out the problem. When Xavier injured his hand in a fencing accident and could not work for 2 weeks, Violet took on extra commissions and brought in enough money to cover their expenses without touching their savings for the house. Ruth visited often, growing visibly happier with each passing month. She had started courting one of the other ranch hands, a quiet man named Thomas, who treated her with gentle respect. Watching Ruth laugh again, seeing the light return to her eyes, was one of the greatest gifts of Violet's new life. As their first anniversary approached, their house was finally finished. It was not grand, just 4 rooms with a porch and a barn for animals, but it was solid and well built and completely theirs. The day they moved in, Xavier carried Violet over the threshold, and they both laughed with pure joy. "We did it," Violet said, looking around at the simple but comfortable interior. "We built something real." "This is just the beginning," Xavier said. "We are going to fill this house with love and laughter and years of happiness." 2 months after their first anniversary, Violet discovered she was pregnant. She told Xavier one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the New Mexico sky in brilliant colors. "I have news," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby." Xavier's face went through a series of expressions, shock to joy to wonder, all in the space of seconds. "A baby? We are going to be parents?" "In about 7 months," Violet confirmed, tears of happiness streaming down her face. "Are you happy?" "Happy!" Xavier pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was made of glass. "Violet, I am more than happy. I am overwhelmed. I am terrified. I am grateful beyond words. We are going to be a family." The pregnancy progressed smoothly despite the harsh territory conditions. Ruth and Mrs. Chen hovered over Violet, making sure she ate properly and did not overwork herself. Xavier became even more protective, insisting on doing all the heavy lifting and constantly worrying about her health. "I am pregnant, not fragile," Violet would protest, but she secretly loved his attentiveness. Their son was born on a warm April evening in 1881, exactly 2 years after the day Violet had discovered Marcus's deception. They named him Daniel, after Xavier's father, and from the moment Violet held him, she knew their family was complete in a way she had never imagined possible. "He has your eyes," Xavier said, looking down at his son with an expression of absolute wonder. "And your stubborn chin," Violet said with a laugh. Being parents was harder than either of them expected, but more rewarding than they could have dreamed. Daniel was a healthy, happy baby who rarely cried and seemed to find joy in everything around him. Watching Xavier with their son, seeing the gentle way he held Daniel and the songs he sang to him at night, made Violet fall even more deeply in love with her husband. As Daniel grew from baby to toddler, their life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Xavier had saved enough money to buy a small herd of horses, starting the ranch he had always dreamed of. Violet continued her seamstress work, but scaled back her hours to focus on raising Daniel. They were not wealthy, but they had enough, and more importantly, they had each other. Ruth married Thomas in a quiet ceremony when Daniel was 2 years old, and she glowed with happiness that Violet recognized because she felt it herself every day. The two couples saw each other regularly, their children playing together as they grew. Ruth gave birth to a daughter, Sarah, and the cousins were inseparable from the start. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Xavier and Violet took a rare evening alone, leaving Daniel with Ruth and Thomas. They rode out to a hilltop overlooking their property and watched the sunset together, something they tried to do as often as their busy lives allowed. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" Xavier asked, his arm around Violet's shoulders. "Sometimes," Violet admitted. "If you had not come to warn me, if I had signed those papers, I would have lost everything and Marcus would have disappeared. I would probably still be in that boarding house, alone and broken. But that did not happen," Xavier said firmly. "You are here with me, with our son, building a life that is real and true. That is what matters." "I know," Violet said, "but I am still grateful that you cared enough about a stranger to track down the man who hurt your sister. Grateful that you saw me as someone worth protecting. Grateful for every day we have together." "I am the grateful one," Xavier said, turning to face her. "You took a chance on a cowboy with nothing to offer but honesty and hard work. You trusted me when you had every reason not to trust anyone. You gave me a family and a purpose and more happiness than I ever thought possible." "We gave those things to each other," Violet said, kissing him softly. "That is what real love does. It builds instead of taking. It gives instead of stealing." As the sun finally set and stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they sat together in comfortable silence, hands linked, hearts full. The journey from that terrifying discovery 2 years ago to this moment of peace had been difficult, but every step had been worth it. Violet thought about Marcus sometimes, locked away in prison, and felt only pity. He had spent his life taking from others, leaving devastation in his wake, and he had nothing real to show for it. Meanwhile, she and Xavier had built something that no one could steal or destroy because it was founded on honesty and mutual respect and true love. Their life was not perfect. There were hard days when money was tight, or Daniel was sick, or the weather was harsh. But they faced every challenge together, and the hard days made the good ones even sweeter. When Daniel was 4 years old, Violet discovered she was pregnant again. This time, it was a girl, whom they named Clara, after Violet's mother. Daniel was fascinated by his baby sister, constantly wanting to hold her and help take care of her. Watching her children together, Violet felt her heart overflow with contentment. "Our family is growing," Xavier said one night as they watched their children sleep. Daniel was curled up in his small bed, and Clara was in her cradle nearby. "It is," Violet agreed. "And every addition makes it stronger, not weaker. That is the difference between building something real and Marcus's illusions. Real things grow and strengthen. Illusions just collapse." As the years passed, their ranch prospered. Xavier's skill with horses became well known throughout the territory, and people came from miles away to buy from him or to have him train their animals. Violet's seamstress business also grew, and she eventually trained 2 young women from town as apprentices, passing on her skills to a new generation. Daniel grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved horses as much as his father did. Clara was more outgoing, with a laugh that could brighten the darkest day, and a determination that reminded Violet of herself. Watching them grow, teaching them about honesty and kindness and the importance of building real things instead of chasing illusions, was one of the greatest joys of Violet's life. On their 10th anniversary, Xavier surprised Violet with a trip to Santa Fe. Mrs. Chen, now elderly but still sharp as ever, agreed to watch the children for a few days. It was the first time Violet and Xavier had been truly alone since Daniel's birth, and they savored every moment. Walking through the streets of Santa Fe, hand in hand, Violet thought about the last time they had been in this city, for Marcus's trial. So much had changed since then. She had changed, growing from a lonely woman desperate for connection into someone confident in herself and her choices. "What are you thinking about?" Xavier asked, noticing her distant expression. "How far we have come," Violet said. "How much has changed since that day I found the stolen watch. I was so lost then, so desperate for someone to tell me I had value. And now I know my value, not because someone else gave it to me, but because I built a life that proves it." "You always had value," Xavier said. "Marcus could not see it because he was too busy looking for what he could take. But I saw it from the first moment I met you. You were already strong and resilient. You just needed the chance to prove it to yourself." They visited the territorial prison where Marcus was serving his sentence, though they did not go inside. Violet just wanted to see it, to remind herself that justice had been served and that chapter was truly closed. "Do you forgive him?" Xavier asked as they stood outside the high walls. Violet considered the question carefully. "I forgive the young woman I was for believing his lies. I forgive myself for wanting love and security so badly that I ignored the warning signs. But forgive Marcus? I do not know. He hurt so many people, and I do not know if he has ever felt genuine remorse. But I do not hate him anymore. He is just a sad man who wasted his life on tricks and schemes instead of building something real. That is more grace than he deserves," Xavier said. "Maybe," Violet agreed, "but I do not want to carry anger around for the rest of my life. I want to focus on what we have built, not on what he tried to destroy." They returned home to their children and their ranch, and life continued its steady forward progress. There were more challenges over the years, droughts that tested their resources and illnesses that scared them, but they faced everything together and came out stronger. When Daniel was 15 and Clara was 11, Violet received word that Marcus had died in prison. He had developed pneumonia during the winter and did not recover. She felt a complicated mix of emotions at the news, sadness for a wasted life mixed with relief that he could never hurt anyone again. She told Daniel and Claire about Marcus, wanting them to know the story of how their parents met and how close Violet had come to a very different life. Both children listened with wide eyes. "So if that cowboy had not warned you about the fake money, we would not exist?" Daniel asked. "That cowboy is your father," Violet said with a smile. "And yes, if he had not come to warn me, everything would be different. I would have lost my property and my savings, and I certainly would not have had the resources to start over. I might never have met your father properly. Or if I had, I would have been too broken to recognize what we could build together." "Father saved you," Clara said, looking at Xavier with new appreciation. "We saved each other," Xavier corrected gently. "Your mother saved me from a life of anger and revenge. She showed me that the best way to honor Ruth's suffering was not to chase Marcus forever, but to build something good and prevent him from hurting others. She gave me a family and a purpose beyond just hunting down a criminal." "Tell us the story again," Clara begged, "about how you fell in love." So Violet and Xavier told the story together, trading off parts, remembering details they had nearly forgotten. How terrified Violet had been when Xavier first appeared, how determined Xavier had been to stop Marcus, the moment in the land agent's office when everything came crashing down, the tentative beginning of their courtship, and the deepening trust that grew into love. "That is what real love looks like," Violet told her children. "Not grand gestures and empty promises, but showing up day after day, being honest even when it is hard, building something together that neither of you could build alone." As Daniel and Clara grew into young adults, they carried those lessons with them. Daniel met a young woman from a neighboring ranch and courted her with patient determination, eventually winning her heart through steady devotion rather than flashy displays. Clara developed a keen eye for detecting dishonesty, becoming known for her ability to see through pretense and value authenticity. On their 20th anniversary, Xavier and Violet hosted a large celebration at their ranch. Ruth and Thomas were there with their 3 children, along with friends from throughout the territory, and Mrs. Chen, now ancient but still attending with her sharp observations intact. As Violet looked around at the gathering, at all the people who had become part of her life, she felt overwhelming gratitude. This was what real wealth looked like, she thought. Not stolen watches and false promises, but genuine relationships built on truth and trust. "Speak the words," Ruth urged when someone suggested Violet give a speech. "Tell us how it feels to have built all this." Violet stood, Xavier rising beside her, his hand at the small of her back in the supportive gesture that had become so familiar over the years. 20 years ago, I discovered that the man I planned to marry was a liar and a thief," Violet began, and the gathered crowd grew quiet. "I thought my world was ending. I thought I had lost my chance at happiness and security. But then a cowboy rode into town and said something that changed my life." She looked at Xavier, her eyes shining. He said, "Do not let that man near your money. He was warning me about the immediate danger, but he was also showing me something more important. He was showing me that real caring means protecting, not taking, that real love builds up rather than tears down." Xavier squeezed her hand, and she continued, "These 20 years have not always been easy. We have faced droughts and debts, sickness and sorrow, but we have faced everything together, as partners, and we have built something that cannot be stolen or destroyed, because it is based on honesty and mutual respect. Our wealth is not in bank accounts or property deeds, though we have been blessed with enough. Our wealth is here, in this room, in the family and friends who surround us, in children who are growing into fine young people, in a love that has deepened with every passing year." She turned to fully face Xavier. "You saved me from a con man's lies, but more importantly, you showed me what truth looks like. You gave me a life beyond my wildest dreams, not through false promises of grand houses in Denver, but through the honest work of building a real home right here. I love you more today than I did 20 years ago, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." There was not a dry eye in the room when she finished. Xavier pulled her close and kissed her while everyone applauded, and Violet knew that this moment, this gathering of genuine love and honest relationships, was worth more than all of Marcus Whitley's schemes combined. As the celebration wound down and guests began to leave, Daniel approached his parents. At 19, he was nearly as tall as his father and had inherited Xavier's quiet strength. "Father, Mother, I want you to know that the example you have set, the way you have built this life together, it means everything to me. When I look for a wife, I will be looking for someone I can build with the way you two have built together." "That is all we could hope for," Xavier said, clapping his son on the shoulder. "Find someone who values honesty and hard work. Find someone who will stand with you through difficulties, not just enjoy the good times. That is the foundation of real partnership." Clara, now 15, and blossoming into a beautiful young woman, hugged her mother tightly. "I am never going to fall for a con artist," she declared. "I have learned from your story." "I hope you never have to face that test," Violet said, stroking her daughter's hair. "But if you do, remember that your value is not determined by someone else's opinion of you. You are worthy of honesty and respect, and anyone who cannot offer those things is not worthy of you." That night, after all the guests had left and the children were in bed, Violet and Xavier sat on their porch as they had done countless times over the years. The stars were brilliant overhead, and the night air was cool and sweet. 20 years, Xavier mused. "It has gone so fast." "And so slow," Violet added. "There have been days that felt like years, but the years have felt like moments." "Do you have any regrets?" Xavier asked. Violet thought about it carefully. "I regret the time I wasted with Marcus, the energy I spent trying to convince myself his lies were truth, but I cannot fully regret it because it led me to you. If I had not been engaged to Marcus, you would not have come to Hachita. We might never have met. So maybe even the bad things serve a purpose sometimes, leading us to where we are meant to be." "That is very philosophical," Xavier said with a smile, and probably more generous than I would be. I still want to punch Marcus in the face sometimes when I think about what he tried to do to you. He is dead, Violet reminded him gently. And we are alive and happy and surrounded by love. We won. That is the best revenge possible. Xavier pulled her close, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. After all these years, Violet still felt that flutter in her chest when Xavier touched her. Still found new things to love about him with each passing day. I want to grow old with you, Xavier said softly. I want 50 more years of this, sitting on our porch, watching our grandchildren play, knowing that everything we built is solid and true. Then that is what we will have, Violet said, because we have already proven we can build something lasting. This is just the continuation of what we started 20 years ago when you rode into town and changed my life. As they sat together under the stars, Violet reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From that terrifying discovery of Marcus's deception to this place of peace and abundance, she had traveled far. She had learned to trust again, to love again, to build something real instead of settling for pretty illusions. The years that followed were good ones. Daniel married his sweetheart and brought her to live at the ranch, helping Xavier expand the horse breeding operation. Clara eventually met a school teacher from Las Cruces and fell genuinely in love with a man who appreciated her sharp mind and independent spirit. Ruth and Thomas remained close friends and neighbors, their families intertwining over years of shared meals and mutual support. Violet continued her seamstress work well into her 50s, finding joy in creating beautiful things with her hands. Xavier trained horses until his body would no longer allow it, then transitioned to advising and teaching younger men the skills he had mastered over decades. They had 5 grandchildren eventually, and then great-grandchildren began to arrive. Each new addition to the family was celebrated as proof that what they had built endured beyond their own lives. On their 50th wedding anniversary, too old now for grand celebrations, Violet and Xavier sat on their porch with just their immediate family surrounding them. Daniel and Clara were middle-aged now, with grown children of their own, but they still looked at their parents with love and respect. "Tell us the story one more time," one of the grandchildren begged, about how grandfather saved grandmother from the bad man. So, for what would be one of the last times, Xavier and Violet told the story together. Their voices were older now, sometimes wavering, but the love in the telling was as strong as ever. They spoke of deception and discovery, of warnings given and trust slowly built, of a courtship that grew into partnership, and a partnership that deepened into profound love. "The important thing," Violet said, her weathered hand clasped in Xavier's equally worn one, "is that real love is built on truth. Anything else is just illusion, and illusions always shatter eventually. Your grandfather showed me what truth looked like, and we spent 50 years building on that foundation. Best decision I ever made," Xavier said, "was riding to Hachita to warn a stranger about a con man. I thought I was just preventing another tragedy like what happened to Ruth, but I found my whole life waiting for me in that dusty little town." "We found each other," Violet corrected gently, "and we built something neither of us could have built alone." As the sun set on their 50th anniversary, painting the New Mexico sky in the same brilliant colors it had shown on their wedding day, Violet and Xavier sat surrounded by the family they had created and the love they had nurtured. Every person in that gathering was proof that truth builds while lies destroy, that honest devotion creates lasting joy, while false promises leave only emptiness. Xavier died peacefully in his sleep 2 years later, at the age of 81. He simply did not wake up one morning, his hand still reaching across the bed toward Violet as it had every night for 52 years. Violet held his cooling hand and wept, but even in her grief, she felt gratitude. They had been given more than half a century together, far more than she had dared to hope for on that terrifying day when she discovered Marcus's deception. She lived another 4 years without him, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She told the story of how she met Xavier to anyone who would listen, wanting to ensure that the lesson endured beyond her life. Truth matters, honesty matters. Building something real matters more than any illusion, no matter how attractive. Violet Preston Lawson died at 85, on a warm April evening, much like the one on which her son had been born. She died in the house Xavier had built for her, surrounded by family, her last words a whispered, "I love you," to the husband who had been waiting for her. They buried her next to Xavier on a hilltop, overlooking the ranch they had built together. At her funeral, Daniel spoke about the legacy his parents had left, not in property or money, but in the example of how to build a life based on truth and mutual respect. "My father rode into Hachita to warn my mother about a con man," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. He said, "Do not let that man near your money." But what he was really saying was, "Let me show you what real caring looks like. Let me prove that honesty and devotion can build something lasting." And they did build something lasting. They built a family, a ranch, a legacy of integrity that we all carry with us. Every time we choose truth over convenient lies, every time we build instead of taking, every time we value people over profit, we honor their memory. The story of Violet and Xavier became something of a legend in that part of New Mexico. Parents told it to their children as a cautionary tale about con artists, but also as a love story about building something real. The ranch they founded remained in the family for generations, a testament to what two people could create when they committed to honesty and partnership. And on clear nights, if you sat on the porch of that ranch house and looked up at the stars, you could almost see two figures sitting side by side, hands linked, looking out over the land they had built together. A cowboy who had learned that the best revenge against those who destroy is to build something beautiful, and a woman who had discovered that her worth was not determined by someone else's lies, but by the truth she chose to live every day. Their story had started with deception and could have ended in tragedy. But because one man cared enough to warn a stranger, and because that stranger was brave enough to trust again, it became instead a story of enduring love built on the firmest foundation possible: honesty, respect, and the daily choice to build together rather than tear apart. That legacy lived on in every descendant who heard the story and chose truth over illusion, partnership over exploitation, real love over pretty lies. In the end, that was the best revenge against Marcus Whitley and everyone like him. Not punishment or imprisonment, though those had their place, but proving that what they sold, those shiny illusions of easy wealth and hollow promises, could never compare to the solid gold of a life built on truth. Violet and Xavier had found their happily ever after, not despite the difficult beginning, but because they faced those difficulties together and chose to build something real, and that made all the difference.